Economics is a fun and fascinating subject which almost nobody in the greater population understands in the slightest. I'm not sure why, except it's not taught. I suppose the powers that be assume that it is either outside of regular human comprehension, or they have reasons not to teach it, or they assume that it's just common knowledge, which of course is ludicrous. So let's get down to what economics is, so we can understand how human psychology and sociology plays a part in that. Because this is a very important thing that if you get it wrong, as an individual, maybe that's not too important, except you just don't understand reality fully. But that as groups don't understand it, they make poor decisions. So, for instance, communism, socialism, free market capitalism, what do they even mean, right? So, money, as you know, is a medium of exchange. It's supposed to represent time and effort, work, right? Of course, due to the way things naturally devolve, it has lost much of that meaning to where people have learned to gamify money as something outside of or separate from what it represents, which is work and time spent working, value added to the human condition, I suppose. But that's neither here nor there. Just basic to understand that that's what money is supposed to be. What money actually ends up being is whatever we think it is. It's worth what we want it to be. Bitcoin, paper money, gold. None of these things have any inherent value except for gold as a conductive metal. Right? People say, "Oh, well, gold, it's rare." Okay, So are hamsters. There's only so many hamsters in the world. You know, there's only so much of anything, right? There's only so many meteors. Why don't we use meteors as a currency, right? Rarity does not grant value, all right? My farts are rare, right? In comparison to the sum total of things. That doesn't mean they're valuable. So simply going back to a gold standard is not going to solve anything, because the problem is not material objects. The problem is human mentality. Things always evolve and devolve according to as they are needed, right? And even Jesus, say what you will about him, he was a poor man living thousands of years ago, but even he knew how economics worked. He said, to he who has, more shall be given. To he who has not, even what he has will be taken away. That is vicious cycles. That's how they work, and that is the way economics and everything in the entire universe works. To think that economics is somehow separate, something that humans made, and therefore we can control it and stuff. It works the same way that entropy works. It works the same way that evolution works. It works the same way that societies work. They evolve and devolve. They grow and shrink according to pressures inside and out and the natural flow of things. A palabra, right? If you know that, the bell curve. A bell curve is how everything works. Up and down. There's a big middle. Distribution of wealth should and usually does pan out that way. The only reason it doesn't pan out that way in a free system is, or capitalism, right, is when it's not a free system. That's called crony capitalism, right? So crony capitalism is a societal how society structures itself and limits free market capitalism, because it's using the government favors and various things to gamify or use corruption to get money, as opposed to hard work, valuable assets, right? It's actually using the opposite. It's using the same thing that causes any economic system to fall apart, right? Communism inherently misunderstands human psychology. That is why it fails. It does not fail because we don't have enough resources. All right. Um, Venezuela has plenty of arable land, plenty of vegetables and fruits that could be grown there, plenty of meat, plenty of wood, plenty of natural resources, plenty of everything that anyone could ever want, and millions of people that could be very well educated to do that. However, because of cronyism, because of corruption, uh, which is enabled by a stronger government via socialism and communism, allows a stronger government. Therefore, where there's a strong centralized government, there is the ability for corruption. Where there is corruption, it works because most people just want to take care of their families and provide for themselves and everything. But there are people, a minority to be sure, that want power. They want to be the king. They want to be top dog. They want to be in charge. They don't care who they hurt, and they don't care what they have to do. They will work themselves like dogs in the dirt themselves in order to become kings. And they will step over your dead body, literally and figuratively, to get that end. That is what they want. That is what they desire. It does not matter if you're in a capitalist society, in which case they become CEOs, and if you're in a crony capitalist society, they become senators, right? Or bribing the government. Or if you are a communist society, they become in the communist government, they become head honchos in that. Or in a socialist, which is more or less somewhere halfway in between, they become a person usually in the government. The government is what causes these things to go south. Argentina used to be one of the richest and most blessed countries in the world. People don't know that because that was in like the 1880s and stuff. They were actually doing very well for themselves. The problem happened when they started dictatorships and corruption and all these things. Corruption is what makes North Korea suck. Not necessarily the communism, except that communism allows corruption to breed much faster. And instead of these jerks who want all the power being CEOs, who have to use money and all sorts of stuff, they are directly in charge of the government, which means they're directly in charge of the army and the police. And so they have more power to inflict more damage than they do in capitalism, where they have to use sneaky tactics. So it is for this reason that capitalism, defined as just basically free market capitalism, is allowing the natural process to take its own course, the ebbs and flows, and that generally leads to a better quality of life for everybody involved. And the difficulty with this, of course, is human psychology. If we were all good people, right, then free market capitalism would be a paradise. If we were all good people, then communism would be a paradise as well. The systems themselves aren't as much of the problem as is people are the problem. The systems either allow or disallow people to become problems. So, under communism, people who want to become problems, who want to be, the king of the castle, who've never seen a throne they didn't want to sit in, these people join the government, and then they have the power to send you off to a gulag if you disagree with them or get in their way. The same thing with imperialism, which sometimes people confuse imperialism and capitalism because a lot of capitalist states also become, or historically became, imperialistic, such as England and India and most of the rest of the world, in that at home in England it was capitalist, but it was still somewhat crony capitalist because it's a monarchy, especially back then it was even more so. And then they had the imperial possessions, which were dictatorships, more or less, and used to fuel the capitalism back home. So they took advantage That's not true capitalism. That's not a closed capitalist system. That's not a fair critique of capitalism. Communism, as we've all seen, um, despite any good intentions from it, and even at its best, the USSR had some good stuff, although there's tens of millions of Ukrainians and others back from the Holodomor, not including today, that people in gulags lined up against the wall and shot. You name it, human rights offenses galore. The Chinese Communist Rebellion, or Revolution, I suppose, tens of millions dead, hundreds of millions dead in the after effects of that. And now we have Xi Jinping in China, and he's basically a dictator. It's communism, but it's a dictatorship. Communism always devolves into a dictatorship. Venezuela, Cuba. What comes to mind? China. What's the first thing? You think communism? No. First thing comes to mind is Fidel Castro, Xi Jinping, Maduro. Oh, that's right. The leaders. North Korea. What's the first thing that pops to mind? Kim Jong-un. Not communism. Communism devolves into dictatorships. It's fascism, which is what a dictatorship is. It's a fancy word for they're mostly conflatable terms. Communism is fascism in that regard, or it always devolves into it. The idealized communism is just that, idealized. It is a poor understanding of human psychology and especially sociology. The same can be said for capitalism, because capitalism allows, it devolves into crony capitalism when not kept in check. It is easier to keep capitalism in check through checks and balances and a well-formed government like the United States, which has lasted very long with relatively free market, as good as it's been pretty much in the world ever, and that allows the capitalism to not so quickly fall into the bad sides. The bad people just sometimes they work hard and become CEOs and make good products, like Elon Musk, Bezos, and all those. They are the bad guys. If America was a communist country, those guys would be generals and Stalin killing people by the tens of millions. Okay, you're lucky that all they're doing is, not letting people have vacation time, or buying small companies, or doing these bad things, pricing people out of the market, killing small businesses. Those are bad things, but it could be far, far worse. And history shows time and time again that capitalism is far better than communism. Unfortunately, capitalism itself cannot stand for much longer, because the reality of the world is changing in a way that will not allow that, or at least not allow classical capitalism, free market capitalism, to exist. Automation, and the extent to which capitalism has reached its crescendo of the redistribution of wealth, where wealth is being congregated in a smaller and smaller class of owners, and the rest of people kind of in the middle supporting that class, and then everybody else dying on the outskirts of opioid addiction, homelessness. You see in California is basically a hyper-focused point of what the rest of America will become, in that there are very, very rich people in California and a lot of very, very poor people with nothing to do, and drugged out of their minds, and all sorts of other problems that are starting to have their after effects in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. The coronavirus, of course, did not help any of this. It only accelerated everything. The problem is that, as we'll discuss in future videos, we will need universal basic income, which sounds like communism, but I assure you it is the future, and it is not communism. It is the next step of evolution of capitalism, as ironic as that sounds.